this episode of AWS On Air. My name is Brian Terry. I'm a senior developer advocate on the CloudFormation team. And if this is your first time viewing AWS On Air, we're excited that you're here. I'm joined with my good friend, Farah. How about you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Farah, and I'm a senior product marketing manager for containers and serverless at AWS. And part of my job, I get to work with the amazing heroes, and we have one of our special guests here, who I'll let introduce himself, and then maybe afterwards, if you could just kind of tell everybody a little bit about what the Hero program is, because I know I've been being asked that today, so I'm going to put it on you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love it. So my name is Lukonde Mwila, or Luke Mwila, and I'm a principal technical evangelist at SUSE. I'm also an AWS Hero. And the Hero program is essentially a group of individuals that work closely with the AWS team and are like a bridge between the different AWS teams and the different services to the developer communities to essentially just help with enablement and are just involved in various ways, because there are a lot of people out there that essentially want to adopt the different AWS technologies but wouldn't know where to start and fall on different parts of the spectrum. Could be introduction level, could be expertise level. And AWS Heroes are essentially people that are there to help you and guide you through the journey.
Yes. So we're here at Reinforce, so we're talking about security. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about container security.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you'll be talking about today, or what you'll be bringing up.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely going to be talking about container and Kubernetes security, as well as container orchestration platforms like ECS. And so that's AWS's equivalent of Kubernetes. And just talking about some of the things like the different threat vectors that you need to consider depending on the solution that you go for, talking about the supply chain and runtime solutions that you can also implement.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So what are some of your favorite security services for containers in AWS, and why?
Right, yeah. So favorite ones, I'd probably go with Inspector for starters. So Amazon Inspector gives you a nice way of actually just scanning your EC2 instances as well as your ECR repositories. And that's usually a good place to start because what you want to end up with is having a picture of what the vulnerabilities actually are. And so Inspector is going to scan your EC2 instances as well as your ECR repositories. And my favorite aspect of Inspector actually is showing you network reachability. So it's going to show you a path that an attacker or potential hacker could actually use to get to your different resources in your AWS environment. So that's really crucial. So that's usually the first step that you want to have an idea of what does my security posture currently look like, because then that will pave the way for you actually remediating.
Very cool.
Go ahead.
No, this is very interesting. I mean, it kind of goes into what we've been talking about throughout this whole day, this whole shift left kind of mindset. We're actually moving the security further up the chain for the developers that are writing code, deploying containers, so we're always looking and thinking about security instead of doing it at the end. Very cool.
Yeah. There's an analogy that a friend of mine likes to use when it comes to shifting security left, and he says, if you have jewelry that you're trying to keep secure, you wouldn't put the alarm right on the jewelry box in your room, because that begs the question, well, why would you want to set it off when the person gets to the jewelry box? So the idea is shift it left as much as possible, catch the thing early, they shouldn't even get on your property. So that same idea, but I love that picture. It usually helps out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
Actually, I would just imagine, that is, I hadn't thought about it like that, but I'm going to have to start using that analogy too.
Right.
Yeah, you can protect everything, even if you had a pink-footed platypus.
So what's an AWS security component that doesn't get much love, but you think it should?
Right. I think one that flies under the radar would be VPC Flow Logs. VPC Flow Logs are super important, and I remember when it hit home for me, the first thing I did was actually tweet it. I said, make sure you got your VPC Flow Logs enabled. The reason being, I think a lot of people think that hacking happens out there. It's this ethereal thing. It's not going to happen to me. But when you have your VPC Flow Logs enabled, you actually get a picture of the traffic to and from your network interfaces for your VPC, and you can see different sources out there and people actually trying to make their way into your VPC.
Yeah.
And so having that picture, when I got to see that, was like, wow, this is actually real. It's not pie in the sky. It's not something out there. So I think that's a really important one, just to give you that picture.
Yeah, we have a number of services that integrate into that to be able to scan those logs, right? Yeah. Very cool.
I wonder how many times that happens a day against, it's not information that I've been given, but like, how many times, so like with the companies that you work with, like how many attacks are like happening a day towards these things? I'm just curious now. I'm just asking personal information.
It's hard to say like the number of times it's happening, but we were just kind of blown away by the volume of it.
Yes.
The volume is pretty intense, and also again the different sources out there, because you might be thinking, well, we're a financial institution in Africa, no one's going to be paying attention to us. Well, you're wrong. There's potential hackers all over the world that are actually trying to get to you, and they've got automated resources that they're doing for this. So it's best to just prioritize your security posture to begin with.
Okay. All right. So it looks like you have a demo, or you have something you're showing us here with ECS Fargate. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a little, I like to call it my omelet. So I have an architecture diagram over here. And there are a couple of different components, and at first glance you might be thinking, well, what's going on over there? And so there are different resources in this particular diagram. And so the goal over here was to create a private isolated network for container workloads, specifically in ECS Fargate. And so I'll work my way from the inside out. So right at the heart of it over there, you'll see an icon for ECS Fargate. And the tasks and the service are essentially associated with your private subnets. So there's no public subnet at all, because we're trying to create a completely private setup over here. And the load balancer as well is associated with the private subnets. So we wanted to make sure all the network traffic was contained within the AWS environment. So there were other AWS services that we needed to integrate with. For example, you'll see over there this ECR and S3, because all of our images were stored in private repositories in ECR, and AWS actually stores the image layers in S3. So to integrate with those, we use VPC endpoints. So that means all the traffic never leaves the AWS network. And so we hit our goal in that particular sense in the particular project that I was working on when it came to this setup. But in addition to that, you still need to have some kind of an entry point into your environment, all right?
Yes,
and so we had a single point of entry, and we used an API gateway, and that API gateway essentially proxied that traffic through to a VPC service endpoint or private link, and that proxied that through to the load balancer in the private subnet. So we managed to just keep everything isolated and contained in a private way, as well as have a single point of entry to our backend container services.
Yeah. I noticed in this architecture, you don't even have like a bastion host or anything like that.
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
But that's actually a really good way of accessing it as well.
Yeah.
There's an open source project that I created for Rancher Kubernetes engine, which is essentially a Kubernetes distribution binary.
Yeah.
And in that particular setup, I have a bastion host in the public subnets, so that becomes the only way that you can access the private endpoint for your Kubernetes cluster. So I think it's a really secure model as well to typically go with your bastion host in a public subnet.
Very cool. Yeah. I can see that you can probably extend this too, like if you had an on-prem workload that needed to connect to this, I can see that you can integrate with this too.
Yeah.
Wow. Very cool solution.
So is there any like pain points that you had and like biggest learning lessons when you were initially starting to set up some of these projects that you could share with anybody or folks? Maybe you probably have a YouTube video already about it that I don't know about, but
yeah, right. Specifically this project or just any other one?
I mean, anything that's starting with like ECS Fargate, anything that you've done with there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a good one is really, again, just understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish. That's always the best point. You want to start off with the particular project and what your goals are. So even when I have interactions with people, they'll ask me, hey, how do I get to that point? I want to try this out. I want to try that out. I'm like, okay, that's great. But you want to take a couple of steps back. What are you actually trying to accomplish? Start with the particular scope of your project, because that's what's going to shape the way for your solution. And then when you have your solution, then you start to see what are the different threat vectors, what are the vulnerabilities, and then you start to remediate from there. And sometimes when I would put the cart before the horse is when I'd run into a couple of issues. But then when you just go back to the drawing board and see what's my actual blueprint, what am I working towards, then it makes things a lot easier.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I assume this architecture you have here can be deployed with the CloudFormation template?
Yep.
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with Service Catalog. Like he's an expert in container security. They can deploy this with Service Catalog. So I like it how all these things kind of come together and can create some useful things.
Yeah. For this very project, actually, I have a Terraform project that's up on GitHub. So people want to clone it, they're more than welcome to do so. I gave a talk at an AWS meetup in Pretoria. Yeah. So, and I walked through this. So, Yeah, a couple of people have really liked this particular one.
Yeah, I really like this one.
Imagine some security features have to be a kind of a hot topic, in the open source community.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you can point out anything anything you'd want to share there, or kind of like talk about, or kind of how. I don't want to say too much because I want to get your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So one that's a hot topic, I think, is definitely secrets in Kubernetes. A lot of people are trying to wrap their heads around that. I mean, I put out a video, and initially it was just picking up slowly, not many views, and then out of nowhere I saw that it got to 1,000 views really quickly, and people started commenting and reaching out and asking, hey, how do you figure this out? How do I do this? And reason being is application configuration is a big part of modern software development now. You're going to have different environments, and you want to have ways of driving the behavior of your application in those different environments. And secrets essentially allow you to store sensitive data for those different environments. But the thing about Kubernetes is that your secrets are insecure by default. They're not encrypted. And so a lot of people are trying to figure out what's the best way of actually going about that, because we need the secrets, but what's the most secure way of actually doing that? And so I typically advocate for using external secrets operator. In fact, when I worked on a particular project, we stored all of our secrets in Secrets Manager, but we were able to use the external secrets operator to tap into those secrets and then expose them as normal secrets to our pods in the workloads.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, that comes up a lot, and you have to have, you need the secrets for the container, but then you have to figure out a way to give them to them securely. I think that's a good solution to the problem. Wow. I think with the architecture, I actually had a chance to take a look at this more.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. The service endpoint, is that a service endpoint to the ECS service also? Or do you don't need that? Or?
If I recall, no, there isn't one to the ECS service.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what's a good place to start if you wanted to make sure you were securing your container workloads?
Right. Yeah. Similar to what I pointed out before, take a look at what your project actually is. So with this one over here, with ECS Fargate, you're not managing any EC2 instances, so there's no management overhead. But that's also you're essentially starting from problem definition and then working out what your solution is. And then from there, how do I then work out my security posture? And so our goal with this particular one was we want a secure network environment. But that would look very different if you were going with a Kubernetes solution, for example. Now, if you go with EKS, thankfully the control plane and the data plane are taken care of by AWS, but then you're going to be responsible for the worker plane. And so now you need to figure out, okay, how are we going to secure the worker plane? And so that, again, you start with what are the threat vectors with the worker plane, And a really good tool to make use of just as a starting point is Kubebench. But you have to be careful with Kubebench. It's good, but if you just use it out the box, you're going to end up with a lot of false positives. But thankfully, there's Kubebench for EKS. So it's optimized for that. And so that's going to give you a real good picture of what your worker plane actually looks like from a starting point.
Yeah, I actually wrote integration for that into
System fantastic.
Manager. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, just put my own work out.
Yeah, hey. I'd actually love to see that.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Sure.
So yeah, very cool, very cool. So, how can customers? Are you laughing at me?
No, I've been trying to figure out a way to throw in our word of the day. I just haven't found it in this conversation, and so I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's funny, I love it, man. Yeah, so how can customers go ahead and just kind of get started with ground one of doing this container security? What do you suggest they do? Do you suggest they go read a blog? Do you suggest they read the AWS documentation?
Yeah.
Where's ground zero?
I think ground zero is a combination of some good resources, which I'll mention just now.
Yeah.
But also get familiar with understanding how serious the threat vectors are.
Okay.
Because the thing about the cloud native space is it really does remind me of Mark Andreessen's article of software eating the world. It's almost like, it feels like it's really coming to play because of just how ubiquitous cloud native technologies are becoming in the tech space. There's rapid adoption of containers and Kubernetes. So there's a lot of excitement and buzz, but the problem is the excitement and buzz runs far ahead of the best practices, which are kind of falling behind. So rather take a look at why those best practices are there in the first place, because there's a lot of insecurities around both containers and both Kubernetes. Take a look at the case studies of when things go wrong. So that would be a good starting point to understand how weak is this thing to begin with. And then some really good resources that I actually point to a fellow container hero, Liz Rice. She's got some fantastic resources.
I know her very well too.
Yeah, so I love her books on container security and Kubernetes security, so I would point you in that direction as a good starting point. I know not everyone is a reader, so if you're not willing to read through those, I actually, myself and a teammate at SUSE, we run an introduction to Kubernetes security as well. It's a free webinar, so you can tune into that, and we cover the basics, as well as one of our products, which is NewVector. But
where would people find that?
So you could actually join the SUSE and Rancher community network. We often advertise the different events in there, and that'd be a good way to actually just tap into it. We run them. We run the Kubernetes security one at least once a month.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And how can people get started with your product? Apparently you guys have some integrations with AWS. Can you talk a little bit about your specific company's products?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk about NewVector, which is an end-to-end cloud-native security tool. And one of the things that it does as well, similar to Inspector, is also scanning your ECR repositories, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And they can complement each other really well. But I also love how they also scan the hosts. Again, that's something that Inspector does. But it's really cool because it gives you a detailed approach of what may be wrong with certain EC2 instances, and it'll actually take you to relevant links with the docs. And that's how I actually found out about Amazon Linux 2022, which is coming out soon. Yes. I think end of this month. That's what I'm excited for. And is going to have SE Linux out the box by default enabled, and that's a lot of cool stuff, So those are probably some tools one of the tools that flies under the hood for securing your hosts is SE Linux, AppArmor, Secomp. So the fact that Amazon Linux 2022 is going to have SE Linux by default, that's a big win. But just back to NewVector. It's essentially trying to cover a holistic approach to securing the landscape for your Kubernetes workloads.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, are you going to, we have about a couple minutes left in this talk. Can you talk a little bit about how customers can see you? Are you giving any talks anytime soon, or container security, anything you want to talk about? Yeah.
Well, what's your favorite thing to talk about?
Yeah.
What's my favorite thing to talk about?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. I'm really getting into container security more and more, and Kubernetes security, but GitOps takes the cake. Yeah, I love talking a lot about GitOps, love talking about Argo CD, love talking about Rancher as well. That's more of Kubernetes cluster management. But yeah, if people want to see some of the work that I'm doing, you can check out my YouTube channel as well. And again, I'm usually plugged into the SUSE and Rancher community network. We have a lot of free events that happen over there, and just different resources that we'll share with people, from technical articles to on-demand videos. And really passionate about sharing knowledge and training. So
awesome.
Yeah.
You guys have guests on the YouTube channel? Because I would love to offer him to be a guest.
Yeah, hey, we could definitely make that happen.
He does have guests because they've asked me to come on and or he's asked me to do a couple things, so they know he has guests on different things.
Yeah, I'd love to make that happen.
Definitely go then. That sounds awesome. Yeah, we can switch roles. You
Yeah,
be the host, I'll be the guest. It'd be super exciting.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, man, it's been great. I learned a lot, especially around container security. What you invented right here is totally awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, what your company's doing is super exciting. I find myself want to go and try a lot of these things. I may try some of this. I may try some of your company's tools. I mean, it's just super exciting. How about you? Did you?
Well, also, I mean, you do so much to help the communities around you. And so just really, really appreciate all the work that you do. And so I'm curious, I mean, so we have I guess we have 1 minute left.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first problem that made you create the video, your first AWS how-to video?
My first AWS how-to video. Let me think back to which one that one actually was. Man, I'm scratching my head here.
Okay, your favorite one then.
My favorite one would probably be the external secrets operator one, where, and how it taps into Secrets Manager. Because I've used it, and I've seen a lot of people wanting to use Secrets Manager for their secrets, and it's a real problem that I can translate to a solution, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
really appreciate you being here, taking the time to come and join us today.
Yeah, it's been an exciting day. We learned a lot. So, thank you for joining us today, AWS On Air. Super excited. Join us for more episodes. We'll be here for tomorrow. So please join in, and we'll talk about some more cool stuff on AWS On Air. My name is Brian Terry, and we'll be seeing you later.